Please welcome to the stage John Osborn, aka Ozzy.
Woo! The only speaker that cheers for himself. Anyway, big shout out to Table 5. They bet me I wouldn't do it. But if you're in the room, you're winning. You're winning if you're in the room. My name is John Osborn, and thanks for having me here today. I don't know about you, but the words that I remember from this morning were standards, best practices, measurement frameworks. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm here. We have a lot of things to solve. We can't solve it alone, and that's what my theme is here today. And so we decided to call it the power of we. Heard Brian earlier talk about little actions that collectively add up to big impact. That is precisely what we have the opportunity and the need to do. We started off the day with the American Red Cross that painted a fairly gloomy and scary picture, but spoiler alert, there's hope on the horizon. So I'm going to take a little bit of a different vector into this conversation, which is the power of we, but we're going to unpack our 5-point plan. We're going to go through the situation. We're going to tell you what AdNetZero is, why it's important, why we want everybody in the room. We have a lot of supporters in the room, but grabbing onto another theme I heard this morning, which was we need to move faster. This doesn't just happen. We launched in the United States on February 7th. We can and we will go faster if we have more support. It is that classic chicken and egg dynamic. We're going to talk about where we've seen progress, but what in the world is this doing here? So here's my story. So about 6 years ago, I was doing some extra credit work at the university I went to school at, way up in Vermont. And it meant that I had to get in the car early on Thursday mornings once a month and drive north. And because I'm an idiot, I'm way too busy. I get up on Thursday morning at 4 in the morning. I live in Connecticut, and I would blaze up 95. And around 7 in the morning, the sun would start to come up, and everything would come alive. And I'm a humongous fan of owls for a lot of different reasons. One reason is we live in a world where everyone's looking down. Owls look up. They can also look 360, which is really important. I'm a big fan of owls. Anyway, I kid you not. I'm driving along, and I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, wouldn't it be cool to see an owl? And because of how I'm hardwired, my thought immediately went to, oh my God, wouldn't it be horrible if I ran over an owl? And this is like right out of some science fiction movie. I kid you not, 2 minutes later, out of the corner of my eye, I see something move, and I look over while I'm driving about 85 on 91, I see this thing, like a 747 with a wingspan coming right for the car. And I was doing about 80. So I was like, uh-oh, at this trajectory, I'm going to mow this thing over. I'm going to speed up, and maybe it'll go behind the car. Failed attempt, smash right up against the driver's side window. And it crumpled like an old feather pillow in the middle of the road. By the time I pulled over, it was too late. I looked all the way down the bottom of the hill, and it was there. But then a car pulled over. I couldn't quite see it. I was way too far away to even yell at the person. And I stood there for about 3-4 minutes. And I was like, damn, it is what it is. I drove up, did the meetings, called my wife, which is, I guess, what one does when they run over an owl. And she's like, well, why don't you call that place up there where they rehabilitate, raptors and things? And I called them, and they said, wait, were you driving that silver car? And I was like, yeah. They said, around 7:30 this morning, Windsor, Vermont? I said, yeah. They said, we got your owl. I'm like, yeah, baby. Over the next 3-4 months, they stayed in contact with me, partially because they gave a handsome donation. But they let me kind of track the rehabilitation process, and then they invited me up for the happy ending, which I'll save the reveal at the very, very end. But that's my story, and I got thinking, during the process of the whole thing, they explained to me that because the environment is changing, their food patterns and their migration patterns are changing, and they're relying more and more on human food that people throw out the window of the car while they're driving up Route 91. The owls come out in the morning because there's fewer food sources in the woods, and they camp out on the side of the highway. And then in the morning, they vector in, and they swoop down, and they don't have really, unlike how they move their head 360, they can't really see traffic coming on, and that's why they end up getting hit by tractor-trailer trucks and everything else. But the other part of the story, which is really coming back to the theme why we're here today, is throughout the process of rehabilitating this thing, they had to reprogram how the bird hunts. because it had been concussed and it had to do it all over again. So neurologists worked with doctors, worked with trainers to recode the whole hunting pattern of the bird. It required synergy, it required collaboration, it required folks coming together and getting that owl back on its wings, not feet, but wings. And that kind of was a really important moment for me because it's nature, it's climate change, it's something I care about, and it's the power of what can happen when collaboration happens. And that's really what we're talking about here in the room today. Look, there is a lot out there. There's a lot of gloom and doom. There are a lot of companies doing different things. In some ways, it's a mess. Some have described it as a perfect storm. But I'm a glass half full kind of person. I'm an eternal optimist. If I was a plant, I'd need to be in the window because I need sunshine, I need optimism, and I do well in an environment like that. So here's a scary stat, but we'll flip it on its head. 71% of people in the world are worried about the negative impacts of the climate, right? But here's one. 91% agree that knowing that their organization was taking climate action seriously and taking action, that would improve their job satisfaction. One thing that we haven't talked as much about is the importance of continuing to win the war on talent when employees really have a tremendous amount of power in that decision-making process. They care about the environment. That's one of the reasons many of you are in the room here today. Just by a show of hands, obviously, this is important from a business imperative standpoint, but who here feels like it's a really important personal mission as well? I'd have to say, the power's in the data, right? Your hands reinforce that. It's personal for me too. And we can leverage that in a positive way going forward. And that's the idea really behind how and why AdNetZero came to fruition in the first place. It arose roughly a year and a half ago out of the UK. And the idea is that if we can unify the entire advertising industry around a common set of standards, ways of measuring, calculating, and reporting carbon emissions, we really can take a giant leap forward on this journey. On behalf of ourselves, on behalf of our clients, on behalf of the industry, and dare I say, even on behalf of the world, and maybe even the owls. So AdNetZero came to fruition, and it got up and running, and they got over about 125 different companies across the UK, of which there's a leadership umbrella of what we call the Global Leadership Group. These are companies that have said, we think it's really important on behalf of the industry to be in the room, to roll up our sleeves and help the industry come to consensus around a common standard framework, okay? You following so far? So we're here to unify the ad industry around best practices, ways of measuring, a way to optimize the advertising operations side of the business towards towards carbon reduction and ultimately helping us to achieve net zero. We haven't published a timetable yet because before you figure out where you're going, you need to figure out where you are. And my friends, believe it or not, we can't even tell exactly where we are as an industry on behalf of carbon emissions because there's no common way of measuring. Both, it's like a quadruple matrix, either globally or locally, you know, media versus production, programmatic versus what, it's very, very complicated, and it can get very, very complicated very fast. So think of us as sort of a unifier and a simplifier. To get our arms around this incredibly complex advertising ecosystem, we thought it would be a good idea to kind of bracket or bucket the industry into 5 core areas. And here's how they stack up. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a glimpse into some of the real action and some of the findings that have happened so far. Action 1 is actually not even unique to advertising because any business or any industry should be doing this, and many are. 1 is get your house in order. Understand where the carbon emissions currently are. Big picture. I'm talking things like energy and waste and travel. We're going to come back to travel in just a second. Action 2 is around production. And the good news is there has been a lot of progress there. So how do we calculate and how do we use carbon calculations to make smarter decisions faster at all phases of the production process so that when you make decisions, if you're an executive producer, you're doing it through the lens not only of cost, but through the lens of carbon as well. And as I also heard this morning, there's a correlation between the two. Action Group 3 is media and all of the stuff that comes with media, all the data, all the technology, all the big media. Action Area 4 is around events, activation, and awards. And Action 5 is around long-term innovation that drives behavior change. Again, some of which we heard about this morning in initiatives like the Green Supply Path Initiative and things along those lines. A lot of that's being geared here by the ANA, the 4As. A lot is being driven by the IAB Tech Lab, and you heard from Hillary this morning on that as well. So this is how we're kind of getting our arms around the advertising ecosystem. This is the global group. These are companies, groups that have signed on because they think this is an important industry imperative. And they include the likes of the major holding companies, Meta, Google, PubMatic, as well as Diageo, Indeed, Reckitt, Unilever, and L'Oreal, which is in the room, which is awesome. So those are your 5 big corporations so far, and we're talking with a lot more. I'm going to tell you in a second who's behind the U.S. right now. We wouldn't be here if it weren't for the firepower of the IAB and, as the IAB Tech Lab, the ANA, and the 4As. And where are we seeing progress? Vectoring back to the production working group, there's a tool. It's called AdGreen. It was developed out of a group called Albert. Maybe some of you in the room have heard of Albert. And this calculator was put together with the specific lens on rigorous record-keeping, input, and information relating to all of the decisions that go through the production process. So it reports out the carbon emissions in a very usable framework that we think is probably best positioned, given all that we know to be true today, for where we think we need to be tilted in to tomorrow. And there are over about 520 different jobs that have now been completed using the AdGreen calculator. A lot of them, to be honest, have been based in the UK, but about 60 plus are bigger jobs that, that came out of the United States. And I happen to know that there are some folks in the room here right now that have had a lot of great experience using the AdGreen calculator. The problem is because given that we only launched on February 7th, it's not yet available in this market. And the other thing is you need to go through some training in order to really use this thing the best way possible. So one of the things we're looking at is not only which tools and frameworks work the best, but we need to think about which tools and which frameworks are the most workable. If you've got a really smart tool, but no one knows how to use it, well, that's no good. Similarly, if you've got a really easy to use tool, but it's not really accurate, it doesn't get the job done, well, that's kind of a problem as well, right? I mean, so you really want it to work, and you want it to be really workable. And so far, based on all of the input and all of the experience we've had to date, this AdGreen calculator is the real deal. So right here, right now, we are working with multiple agencies. They do skew more towards the creative agency camp, as well as some production companies and ancillary companies along those lines, to leverage the AdGreen calculator, go through the training, and get this thing up and running. So while it's early days, we are seeing a tremendous amount of momentum here. This says 1,700 projects measured. The fact of the matter is we just published an annual report, which if you go to the AdGreen website, you can download this report and see it. 1,700 is an accurate number for projects, but with the number I'm giving you, 520 are full creative campaign jobs, okay? This just gives you a little bit of a sneak peek in terms of where the carbon is currently falling. You'll see that big red piece of the pie there. That's travel. That's like, depending upon which study you're looking at, is between 65% of the overall carbon emissions related to production. And then you'll see things like materials, filming spaces, right down to paint. And this starts to give you insight behind smart switches. I don't need to talk to this group about the impact of flying economy versus first class. That's table stakes for this group. But look at things like shifting from diesel fuel to biofuel. It has an impact. Beef to veggie, that has an impact too. But in all honesty, it's not the biggest slice of that pie we looked at earlier. So in prioritization, going back to something Brian was saying earlier, is that really where we want to point our howitzer for job one? because this is not going to be a silver bullet, turnkey, flick the switch solution. This is going to take a little bit of time. So this gives you a sense for some of the input that's coming in, some of the smart switches, although those are fairly rudimentary, that we're starting to see executive producers make when they start to use tools like the AdGreen calculator. The AdGreen calculator, as I said, is not available in the US, but there is a great organization already in the US that is a tremendous community that was built from the ground up by an incredible dynamic leader named Gabby Kay. It's called Green the Bid. They offer a lot of recommendations, best practices, and a reference guide, and also other forms of training around, again, taking a climate-friendly lens to how production is done. And she and her team are working on creating various platforms that will only enhance that. The great news with Green the Bid is they really understand the community. So what if you had a Green the Bid solution and a potential solution around AdGreen? You could have potentially one more predictive tool that's used earlier in a production process, like during the triple bidding phase and the rough estimate phase when the initial decisions are made. And then as long as you've got someone keeping the notes behind, even details like carpool vans, where are they originating from, if someone's taking a rail, is it a diesel or electric train? These are all the inputs that go into the AdGreen calculator. And then in about an hour and a half after the end of a job, you get a full report on the full carbon load across the whole spectrum of everything that was related to that particular job. Now, I know that this is more or less a media-driven group, but this just gives you a sense of some of the momentum and some of the progress that's being made in the production vertical. Speaking of media, the Global Media Working Group is working hand in hand with GARM right now to evaluate and to work with and collaborate a lot of the various platforms and calculators that we've had visibility into at this stage in the game. And while you haven't seen all that progress, I can assure you that there is a working group that has seen a tremendous amount of great information, including a lot of great information from some of the individuals you've seen on this stage here this morning. And given that GARM, that process worked out pretty well, there are some principles behind that that we think will only strengthen our ability to bring this industry together and to create that standardized framework that we need to do as an industry going forward. The IAB Tech Lab in the United States, the power and the importance of that organization cannot be underestimated. That working group that was described earlier, which AdNetZero is very much a supporter of, that's incredibly important. But the trick is we can't let GARM go down a rabbit hole without including some of the great progress that's been made by the IAB Tech Lab, right? So a lot of my time is spent connecting the dots so that hopefully the left hand knows what the right hand is doing and what the right hand can know about what the left hand is doing so that we're all staying interconnected. Again, the power of we. So we're enjoying a lot of good traction in the States under the umbrella of media, but particularly a lot of the efforts being led by the IAB Tech Lab. A lot of the folks in the room here today are very much a part of that working group, and I think it's absolutely terrific. But the trick is to make sure that regardless of which working group you're in, that they're sharing across the working groups, because the last thing I want to have happen is for a whole working group to be spending a lot of time, energy, and effort going down the rabbit hole and redoing work that's already been done. We'd be a hypocrite if we were doing that. We would be falling into our own trap that we're trying to guard against, right? Anyway, as I mentioned, we launched on February 7th here in the United States. We were very fortunate and blessed to have the support of lots of you in the room, as well as a lot of the agencies that are part of the holding companies that are existing here in the United States. So we launched, along with Marla and Bob and David from the IAB, the ANA, and the 4As, and we had representation there from many of these different companies that you're seeing on this slide here today. But I wouldn't be here if it weren't for these supporters, because we're a nonprofit, and every dollar we bring in for our membership fees, which are fairly modest, to be honest with you, all things considered, and I'll be around all afternoon and all evening, and I hope you do want to become a part of AdNetZero, I'll break it all down for you. But if we want to go faster, we just need to scale, and we can't scale, we can only scale on pace with the support that we get from our supporters like the ones you see on this slide here today. But the great news is, even though we launched 8 weeks ago, this is where we are. And we're like a dog on a bone, and we're not going to stop. We're going to keep going because we know how important it is for the industry to make real progress here. At least that's my calling, and that's why I'm involved in this thing. When my phone rang after I left my former career back in August of last year, my phone rang, to be honest, in October. So I got, I don't know, 6-7 weeks off. It was nice. You might be wondering, what can you do here today? First is ask questions. The second is obviously learn up and bone up. There is no shortage of great information. We can just help you sort through it to figure out what's what. That's really what we can help you do. So, number one, take a look at your travel. Make a plan for travel. Ask your management, what's our plan for travel? Travel is the lowest hanging, biggest piece of fruit that we can grab onto. And I'm not going to tell you how you should do your business. You should be able to figure that out for yourself. But I'm just saying, the biggest carbon load is travel, regardless of whether you're doing a production job, flying to Cannes, traveling to New York to come to the Green Summit. And I'm a big fan of face-to-face. So this is really kind of like what I would call healthy friction in my DNA, because I think it's important for us to show up and be face-to-face in certain contexts. I just don't know if we have to do it quite the same way we've been doing it before, and traveling quite the same way we've been traveling before. We can be more selective, and we can be more thoughtful about how we do it, truth be told. Set up a cross-discipline green team. Think about doing that. That's a really important thing to think about doing. Lots of companies are doing that right now, and they're hiring a chief sustainability officer. That role didn't exist a couple of years ago. But here's the trick. We want to make sure chief sustainability officers have real power, have real decision-making power within the organizations that they exist in. Not camped in some darkened corner office on the basement floor. You know, they need to be part of the real management team pushing for real decisions to be made, because it's really important. Third is start using resources like some of the training kits. And I've put on the slide here a couple of them that exist here today. You can go to the AdGreen website. You can go to greenthebid.earth website. It's fantastic. You'll get a lot of great information on these sites. And more importantly, your people will be able to get great information. And you should encourage your people to seek out this information. It's really important. Consider who you're working with. As we've discussed here today, lots of companies are stepping forward. Sharethrough certainly has. Lots of you in the room certainly have. And I've seen it firsthand. I can personally attest to it. Start measuring. There are enough frameworks out there now that we can all start to begin to measure. It may not be perfect. Better to be roughly right than precisely wrong. But my friends, we can start measuring now in certain areas. And lastly, set goals. You know, we can refine them along the way as more information starts to come in, as we get more clarity around the standards. But start measuring if you can. And we've seen through the conversations here today that that can be done. I already kind of covered this point. I think it's a bit redundant. We don't need to use more oxygen in the room around this, but flying is really, really important. And so that's kind of my spiel. We exist for the betterment of the industry. We exist because there's a need, and we exist because there's an opportunity to pull this crazy, fragmented, somewhat competitive industry together to rally around not only a common objective, not only around a common mission, but a common set of standards and best practices and measurement frameworks, so that it's not apples and pears and oranges, that it's one way of measuring so that we can report consistently. And then guess what? AdNetZero fades away. And that's okay, because I'll have my owls. And I'll leave you with this. It's a happy ending of sorts, at least a happy owl ending. Hold on, I'm going to skip over this here. There we go.
Just screaming.
Okay.
And then on the count of 3, you're just going to gently toss them forward.
Okay.
1, 2, 3. Bye, bye. Okay, bye that way.
Wow.
Do you know, I've never shown that video in front of a live audience before, and I got to be honest, I'm getting a little verklempt. I don't know what's going on. As I said, I like owls. I'm just going to leave you with this. There's just one more element of the story beyond the nature, beyond the power of we and the collaboration that all played out in the rehabilitation of this owl. I want to go back to the dude that stopped on the road. I know it's a guy because they sent me an email, which actually has a funnier part of it. But he didn't have to stop. He did it because he thought it was the right thing to do. He did it. He was late to work, even though he did it. He wrapped it up in a leather jacket, and he drove it 12 miles to this place to be rehabilitated. And every now and then, you need a little help from your friends. And every now and then, you might even need a little help from somebody that you think is a competitor. That's what we have the opportunity, and that's what we need to do if we're going to really make a dent in this and move it forward as fast and as aggressively and as successfully as we have the opportunity to do. So that's my time. Thanks for having me. I'm around all afternoon. Appreciate it.